USA versus Korea matchup at the end of the first day of BlizzCon is going to go down in history as one of the most important games played in the development of Overwatch esports. I could make this entire video just about the significance of this match and what it taught us as spectators and viewers of the game of Overwatch, but I'll just say a few key points about it first, and then we'll get into analysis of the actual ins and outs of the game. Being able to see it live, I think, tells a much different story than you may have saw from watching at home on Twitch. The context, the tension, and the electricity in the stadium, I think, has kind of gone undersold. And we had just walked through the doors, finding our seats when Monte Cristo was antagonizing the crowd, tearing off his USA jersey to reveal his true colors, supporting South Korea. All the audio of the crowd that I've heard either on Twitch or in videos or even in our BlizzCon vlog video doesn't really do the justice for the energy that was in the room. The boos were deafening, and the loudness of them was only outmatched when the cheering for USA, especially in the first few maps, was reaching a gut-busting roar. I've been to packed stadiums for actual sports events before, and the energy and enthusiasm in the arena bested all of my experiences thus far, proving to me that not only nerds like myself can get into watching Overwatch esports, but there may be some hope for the Overwatch League and getting the general player base to be interested in top-tier competition, especially when it's surrounding your regional colors. A little bit easier when it's a David and Goliath story between the USA and South Korea, so I look forward for time telling whether we can get as equally excited for our regional teams, the Houston Outlaws or the San Francisco Shock, whatever your flavor, because if it can, the dream of making the Overwatch League the premier next esports league to rival the leagues of sports of old might be a reality, and I wasn't convinced of that until I saw the energy in that arena that day. Now, as I'm sure many of you know, I did an analysis of the expectations we could have going into this series, and I think a lot of those expectations did come through. But one area that I am more than happy to have been wrong about is that USA did not get swept. They put up an incredible fight on the first 3 maps, and we have some seriously beautiful Overwatch to dissect. Now, in the last 2 maps, everything went just to downhill, let's say. I don't know if the team morale had just got shook. The South Korean team definitely has far more experience playing in long series and maintaining their level throughout them in order to make comebacks and really grind out a series. Or perhaps the map pool was just starting to get kind of thin for the US and the preparation was falling flat. I'm not exactly sure. There's far more criticism of the US's play in those last 2 maps, but a lot to celebrate as well as analyze on the first 3. And without further ado, I bring you a full breakdown of one of the most entertaining Overwatch competitions that we've seen thus far. We were able to learn a lot about this series in just the first few moments of how both teams approached Nepal. And based on how this played out, it developed a narrative that we can follow throughout the series. First things first, they wanted Jaehong on Ana, and what that means is you want to have a really tanky core around him in order to deathball. Here in Nepal, they're putting Flower on the Reaper, and even on point 2, they go to a Bastion, and what that tells me is that South Korea is looking to win with their teamwork, not with their solo carry potential, other than Seobi going and dueling Sinatraa. They know they have the better coordination, and they're willing to play these team comps that require synergy in order to work, rather than just letting Flower unleash his carry potential. Now, as everybody knows, that starts to change a little bit as the series goes on, but these first few engagements kind of dictate the story of how you can even win fights without Mercy in the current patch of the game. If your supports don't die, and you're able to have the better positioning and sustain, you don't need to have the get out of jail free card of the Resurrect, because between Speed Boost and Ana's Bio Nade, you have some seriously powerful mid-fight abilities that if used correctly, it doesn't matter if the enemy has an extra life, because they're just coming back to lose the fight again, especially when you have Seobi hunting down Sinatraa time and time again, winning that duel convincingly. The only problem comes through is when South Korea don't get a lot of value from their ultimates. In fact, over-ult prior to Adam on the USA side using his Valkyrie. I think dumping too many ultimates into the previous fight, especially Zumba's Graviton, really got punished on the retake when Valkyrie came in, and even this next fight where South Korea comes in to retake and Earth shatters the Mercy, United States is able to frag back, Adam keeps his Valkyrie, and South Korea expended most of their resources. This is almost a done deal right here and there. In hindsight, I think if Zumba tried to let Adam's Valkyrie get activated and then use Graviton only on the Mercy, they likely could have been able to swing the value in their favor, but the Valkyrie value was just too strong for the USA, and this first round being so competitive with every player playing really well on every position, we knew we were in for one hell of a series because the gap between the two teams wasn't nearly as wide as we might have thought. Now, South Korea once again goes for a fairly cocky opening, going for a death ball bastion strategy on Nepal. This is something that got used way back in the day in Overwatch esports, particularly was good at shredding the double Winston comp that used to exist when there was unlimited pick. And this round really shows what I mean by South Korea using their teamwork in order to win. Yes, Flower is one of the best DPS players in the world, but I don't think the skill gap on Bastion really gets shown in the team fight scenario. It's more about how well they protect the Bastion and how Mano and Zumba are just always blocking damage and keeping the death ball alive for so long. Between the healing of Jaehong and his positioning being inaccessible entirely, the tanks always being in the way of the damage sources, South Korea is able to make an impenetrable defense on the point, and the South Korean coordination really shows through on this map. The United States did not look prepared to be able to engage this comp correctly. In order to play dive comp against it requires some good target prioritization. Also, Farah is nowhere near as good against Bastion as she used to be. Her DPS output is just so low, and between the damage resistance of Bastion and his self-heal, he maintains through a lot of that damage as well. Jake tried to go to the Genji, which really isn't that great against the Bastion either, and well, you just didn't come up with an answer fast enough, and South Korea using a wonky strategy gives them a convincing round 2 win. But the United States are about to answer back. The star player for me in round 3 was Fact Fiction, who clearly was the better Orisa in this series, I would have to say. This first environmental kill onto the Roadhog was all the difference, and South Korea does a pretty admirable job almost coming back, and a crucial poor timing reload out of Jaehong stops Toby from staying alive. Otherwise, they may have actually even fragged back in this situation. This whole round plays out really close, but just getting first control puts you at such an advantage on control points. I think the win rate is something like 3/4 of the time when you win first control, you're going to win, just based on how the ult economy has to work and the big defender's advantage you're going to have. The USA was put at a great spot here. And the second major play that gets made by Fact Fiction is on this hold, hitting a perfectly timed halt to protect himself from the tire of Flower. Flower built this ultimate in the first fight and got nothing out of it. Toba used Valkyrie to no avail, and South Korea just couldn't find meaningful damage, and going into the final fight, the resource disadvantage was just too vast, and then the USA gets to just go spawn trap and stagger out the rest of South Korea, and they don't even get another chance to touch the point. The stadium erupts, USA all around. The boys have to be feeling a little bit better knowing that they didn't only just compete in this map, but won it, and Sinatraa, although was losing quite a few duels in the first 2 rounds, really came alive in the last one and showed why he's going to be a star player in the Overwatch League. Sinatraa got a lot of criticism for underperforming, but if you're a Sinatraa fan, I don't think you need to worry. This being his first Overwatch LAN, I believe, going right up against the Goliath of South Korea, I think Seobi did outsmart him quite a few times, but I still think that Sinatra's mechanics are actually superior to the likes of Seobi. Seobi's movement and mind games got the better of Sinatraa, but I hope and think that that's something that he can improve over time. Now, the opening of Eichenwalde here, United States is attempting to hold with a Junkrat and a counter-engage tanks. They're dive tanks, but this comp is built to play defensively because it has the Mercy and the Junkrat hiding in the back. And what the boys for the red, white, and blue did against the Farah flank here was perfect. Those of you who are looking to counter Farah, notice the shots that Flower doesn't have. Half of what Farah can do in order to take over the game can be negated by smart positioning. No hit scan on the team, no one contesting the Farah, but deleting her impact by having smart positioning through the map. And this time, it's Jake that finds the smart angle of attack and is able to shred the backline of South Korea, and the first attack just gets stifled entirely. The next attack, the counter engagement of Cool Matt, rips apart Toby, and that's going to sort of be a theme for the rest of the series. Toby had a really hard time on Mercy. Next attack for South Korea comes through, and the brilliant mind games between Jake on the Junkrat and Flower on Far here is incredible. It's a really awkward duel to try to win for either character if both play really well. Farah should be favored in it, but Jake does some 200 IQ movement here to trick Flower into leading his rockets and then just standing still, making them miss, and then he's able to get away. Now, they stall out this fight, but eventually South Korea just hits some shots. They have respawn advantage, and they're going to end up taking first point. But as I'm sure many of you know, the duel between these two on the DPS slot was a serious head-to-head, and I think Jake has to be proud of the majority of his performance, and it was indicative of the USA's play in general in these first 3 maps. They didn't play scared. They were willing to take the fights, which is what you have to do in Overwatch. You can't care about how much better the enemy is compared to you. You have to confidently take the engagements that you have to win, because that's how South Korea is going to play. That's how Flower gets unleashed in this Streets phase to stagger out this first defense. And I think as a viewing experience is why the USA-Korea game was so good, is because both teams were playing so boldly, either in their strategy or in how they took engagements, and it led for an incredibly action-packed series. But both teams' Streets phase attacks moved quite swimmingly, where the majority of the game got won or lost was in the 3rd stage. Now, I'm actually not a fan of teams running dive comp on attack into the 3rd stage of a lot of payload maps, especially Eichenwalde, and you're going to see why. Junkrat is just far too good on the defensive side and can constantly just play keep away and bounce money nades down the lane. It's too easy for somebody to die, whereas if you play a more tanky sustained comp that can slow push, I think that's a much better strategy. But South Korea is going to end up running this dive comp for quite a while and getting stuffed up mostly against Jake's Junkrat and the better sustained comp of the triple tank out of the United States. Pro tip, anytime you're struggling on any part of any Overwatch map, going triple tank is a fairly decent idea most of the time. Not a lot of things counter it, and even if your enemy does build to counter it, it's more easy to counter those characters. Like if they go Reaper, you can go Farah or McCree or anything with a ranged advantage. Going triple tank is one of the best strategies in Overwatch, and with Moira coming out, I don't think it's going away anytime soon, especially on any tight corridor map. King's Row, Last of Eichenwalde, places like this. It's really going to shine. Because United States has a respawn advantage, so as long as they just sustain on the cart and eventually get some kills, the attack of South Korea is going to stall out like it did time and time again. Now, where everything changes is in the last 16 seconds, and this is something that USA have to be kicking themselves over, because this could be the difference between them winning this map and losing it. And some really high-level Overwatch gets displayed from South Korea in their intelligence of when to use what abilities. South Korea have 3 ults online. USA is about to have 4, which including Graviton should mean that they have an advantage in this fight. Sinatraa pops an early Graviton to engage the characters on the cart. Cool Matt pops his self-destruct down to clean up anything in it, and Zumba is actually staying off the cart here to allow his team to get sacrificed over to the side, and instead plays to build up his own charge and have the last man on point to be able to touch the cart. Keep in mind, in sort of the Harry Potter Quidditch match going on here, where are the supports? Miles away from the engagement, South Korea's supports are hiding, especially with Toby's Valkyrie, which he pops after all these interactions happened. Raucus pops his Transcendence, I assume with the intention to just win this fight quickly, but all that does is stall out the fight. It would have been much better for Raucus to use his Trance in order to gain an advantage, whereas using it now causes a stalemate, and Toby somehow is able to wait for the last possible second, lets Raucus's Transcendence end, pops both reses. Now we're in a 6v6, and it's a nightmare scenario for the USA. They popped all of their ultimates, but now the key key takeaway is Flower's Dragon Blade is on deck. And that's when South Korea unleashed the beast. No support ults left from the United States, and the Dragon Blade rips and tears through the USA, and now the cart is allowed to keep moving. Now, there's a lot of stall shenanigans coming up around the bend here, which has some value to break down, but I think more importantly is taking one more look at this last fight and how USA should have won it. In my opinion anyway, in these waning seconds, it would have worked a bit better to aggressively attack South Korea with their ultimate advantage and use graviton before they can touch the cart. And the more characters you can grab off the cart means that the remaining characters have to suicide onto it, whereas grabbing characters onto the cart stalls them there and allows them to contest it as the time ticks away, whereas to some degree, if you grab some characters off the cart, the ones that are scrambling to touch it, you can more easily focus. It's sort of like having two grabs at once, if that makes sense, in a positional way. Stepping up to grab the Mercy would have won the entire game, but obviously Toby played this well and hid really far out, but that's why reaching out in order to go get that kill could have won this map. It's important to note that when analyzing these really complex ult exchanges, hindsight is always 20/20, so it's really easy for me to say what they could have done, but it's when playing these really complex ult fights over and over again and really studying them is why a team like South Korea or the South Korean region in general is going to excel when these moments happen. Especially Lunatic Kai are very good in the clutch play, managing resources and using them appropriately type situations, and it's something that I think every region can learn from. So even without the perfect hindsight looking back at this, I think we can see the problem of not properly staggering your ultimates in order to last throughout the different exchanges through the fight. What I mean by that is, Cool Matt didn't really need the bomb to follow up on the grab, whereas just imagine if he had it after the grab when the reses came in and he was able to throw it up above the cart and they had to get off it for some reason, or it's going to get a kill here or there probably, whereas when they're barely even touching the cart and you grab 2 on it, they're free kills. Like, they can't even defend themselves. You don't need that damage there. Also, I think Raucus probably would like to have that Transcendence back because there's a general principle in using support ultimates in Overwatch that the team that uses them second, or at the very least can get away with using them second, typically wins. So you can't let your team die, obviously, and then try to trance, then it's no good. But if you're able to wait out their trance and then use it yourself, that's how you eventually start to jockey back and forth for ult economy wins, and that's how South Korea slowly built up an advantage at the end of the big exchange. United States used too many too quickly, and before you know it, Flower's the last man alive with an ultimate, and it's a sword, and it's wrecking the entirety of the United States. Granted, popping trance did provoke the response of Jaehong to pop his trance as well, but remember what your win condition is in that situation. On the last fight of defense, you don't want to stall it out. Normally, just stalling out the fight is good enough, but you want to come out on top to end the map, whereas the attacking team on their last attack have no choice whatsoever but to stall. So to use that to your advantage is to be a little bit more greedy in the exchange and force them to use their stuff first so you can come out on top eventually. Okay, South Korea makes a miracle happen and ends up pushing it for 2 more fights in overtime, but the United States is not in a bad spot yet. Jake's Junkrat has been good going for it here, especially against the slower tanky style comp of South Korea's defense is going to prove to be a good strategy. However, just watching the South Korean tank play, it's so great. Just look how difficult it is for Jake to find any meaningful damage. Just the shield and bubble placement to block the damage coming in is always so flawless from these guys. Whether we're watching it on King's Row or here in Eichenwalde, it doesn't matter. The tank play denies so much damage from Jake, and of course, the nature of the Phalanx style comp to keep Ana alive kind of allows her to be a star player in some ways. Jake overstays his welcome, gets slept, and there goes a defensive hold. Now, the attack comes back in, Jake gets a frag on the outside against Seolbi, but even more importantly, Toby doesn't hear the tire coming, I guess, and is flying like 10 feet above the ground against the tire, even though he has Valkyrie. A really big mistake that USA just eats up, and there they take 0.1 off the back of better mercy play and better ultimate usage. The streets phase of the United States is going to be pretty successful as well. They, just like Korea, are able to take the proper space, use the high ground, win frag duels, and come out on top But I did want to highlight this duel between Flower and Jake, and it just goes to show you the attitude that USA was coming into this match. I mean, this does not look like a favorable duel, but it's one that Jake almost won. And it's play like this, even though it got Jake killed, that made us want to cheer even harder for the USA. Soldier can be a very good duel for Junkrat if he can get in close. Flower just melted him before that damage could be found. Getting into third with 2.5 minutes left, this upcoming engagement is a slaughter. Everyone on USA is hitting their shots, and South Korea are dropping like flies, pushing it around the bend. The stadium is erupting, and it looks like USA could finish with a time bank above a minute, which would have gave them a huge chance to win the map. But what went wrong here? Jake lands a pill on Seyobi and finishes off Toby with a mine. Flower answers back, but Jake kills him. At this point, USA has a massive numbers advantage, especially after Adam gets the res off on Sinatraa. By my count, South Korea is in a 3v6 here. Jaehong is at the doors of the spawn, Zumba is stalling out the cart, getting healed by their Zenyatta, and Mano flies into the back line with Primal Rage and assassinates Raucous. That was the play that changed it all, and is exactly what I prescribed for the USA's defense. You see, the thing is, Zumba on Diva is one of the stickiest, most annoying stall the objective type characters in the game. It doesn't matter that South Korea are in a 3v6 at the start here, because Zumba has such a long delay on the cart, you can't do anything about it. Even if you kill Zumba, he pops the self-destruct, and you might have to sacrifice yourself to go kill the mini Diva before he gets into mech, but because that doesn't happen, the cart doesn't get any progress through this whole time. Meanwhile, Mano gets a key frag on the back end. The USA have to figure out their priorities here. Either they're going to have to be willing to potentially get a kill on them from the self-destruct to quickly kill the Diva, or they concede that getting the objective is just not a thing here. In Overwatch, sometimes some characters just survive forever and are going to guarantee a respawn wave. So what you have to do is play for that respawn wave. You have to sustain your own backline and disrupt their respawn wave coming in, getting more frags in the process, ignoring the objective during this time. Because if you can't kill the things on the objective fast enough, efficiently enough, you might as well be patient in this fight and win it entirely. Don't let any kills happen on your side and kill the respawners coming in, not focus the objective. We'll actually be able to see South Korea find themselves in these exact scenarios and not make these same mistakes. The answer here, and what South Korea does, is to play peel focused, sustained focused, rather than objective focused. Because there's no point to pump more resources and attention into an objective you can't win now. You have to be patient, peel for your Zenyatta, and sustain. That's the only option. Otherwise, these retakes aren't surprising when they happen, they're inevitable. In the chaos of watching this footage, I almost missed one of the most key misplays in this entire fight. Take into account everything I just said about not trying to win a fight you can't win against a stall hero. That makes this transcendence from Raucous even worse. I can't stress enough how badly timed this ultimate is. South Korea was making no play, was dealing no damage, other than stalling the cart, and Raucous responds to that with infinite health from Transcendence. Well, as it turns out, as far as the objective is concerned, Zumba's Diva has infinite health on the cart. Functionally speaking, it guarantees a respawn wave. So to trade Transcendence for no cart progress, just to hope that you can use the trance to rush the enemy spawn, the enemy doesn't even have to come out because they have Zumba stalling the cart for them. And what's worse is that right after trance subsides, that's when Mano gets the kill on Raucous, which snowballed all of this. Imagine the reverse scenario where Raucous is more patient with his Transcendence, Mano pops Primal Rage, he discords him, and uses trance to save his or another teammate's life. This is entirely different. Now, you might start to think that I'm being overly critical of a sort of wham-bam play. A lot of chaos happening, a lot of things are happening quick, but this is the level of mastery that the Koreans have, and I want USA to win next time. You don't see Korea making these same mistakes, at least not to the same degree, which is why they're winning in these odd situations and USA loses. It isn't by accident, it's by understanding the macro game to a greater degree. And it's this proclivity of the USA to want to quickly win an objective now, rather than actually win the team fight throughout an exchange, that gets them losses over and over again in this series. And it starts off with this Transcendence. This was the difference between United States winning this map with all likelihood, or setting up for South Korea to come back in it. And that's kind of what they did. Unlike the USA, when times were tight, South Korea actually goes aggressively in this scenario, spawn killing the United States, and okay, so this is a little bit goofy. Flower is getting some outrageous spawn nades miles into the distance, and Sinatraa actually gets doinked walking up the stairs. He thinks he dodges it, but the damage amp nade bounces back and hits him. Is just a comedy of errors, you know? And you hate to see it. You hate to see a rain of spawn nades get so much value, but there you go. And anyway, like I wanted the USA to do, South Korea dived the engagement early, because frags are the name of the game here, not holding the cart. You don't want to give the enemy an opportunity to come touch the cart and stall out in overtime, because then you can get a wacky bunch of exchanging of ultimates that stalls out the fight and you end up somehow losing on defense. No, go take the engagement sooner to make it very expensive for anybody to come to the cart, because that makes your focus fire on defense so much easier. Granted, there was a bigger space between the attack spawn and the cart in this instance, so there was more room to work with, but the principle still remains the same on both sides. Even caught in a trap, Seolbi kills Jake, a trap somehow kills Raucous, and here they're just flooding in, and that aggressive move forward staggered the attack to such a degree that it was thinned out by the time it got to the cart, making for an easy South Korea victory on Eichenwalde. A real emotional one, and a sad one to have lost, considering the advantage that USA found themselves in, but a learning experience for everyone involved, I think. Now, moving on to the heralded best map of Hanamura anybody's ever seen. Quite a bit of this map was in my video about Flower and his Widowmaker, so we'll be focusing on him quite a bit less today, and instead moving on to the first attack by the United States. Really weird spot that Korea decided to set up here, and they don't do this again in the tournament. Instead, they play the corner like most teams do. I don't know what they were thinking with this defense. Maybe if they assumed the Soldier was going to come out, Soldier would have had a hard time pushing into this, but Jake has none of that, and he goes into artillery mode, shelling into the defensive comp of South Korea, and it pays dividends and allows them to set up for a very convincing roll into second point. The tire allows for the Diva D-Mech. They have all of the ground, and they're just able to snowball from here. Really sick stuff from the USA, a nice clean attack, and a really odd decision from South Korea to set up in that spot, a defensive hold I don't think I've ever seen before, and I definitely haven't seen it work, because I've only seen it once, and it was there. So, Korea get counter-stratted, and now it's their chance to go on attack. On a lot of these 2CP maps, the first point of attack is often very favorable to sniper characters, especially Widowmaker, and Flower shows us why. The vertical movement that Widow can get with the 8-second cooldown on the hook makes for this sniper scope to be incredibly scary. Even though the United States catch the aggression of South Korea really well and get a lot of frags on the main attack, they just don't have an answer to Flower. And this is going to be one of the key difference makers in the series, because the only Widowmaker player that the United States have is Raucous. And I think in hindsight, it may have made sense to put Jake or Sinatraa on a support and allow Raucous a chance to challenge him, because in the Mercy meta, Widow snipe attrition can straight up just carry an entire match, because normally you could just dive a Widow, but because you have res and it works better defensively, often that can be more expensive than it's worth. So battling the Widow v Widow is probably the only good option, although the United States does have a good answer for this on their second defense. On their first defense, it caused a lot of problems. I think this peak by Jake is one that probably keeps him up at night. If you ever watched him stream, he's quite hard on himself when he makes his own mechanical mistakes, and this is one that is just unacceptable against a Widow. I mean, he doesn't even get the reflect off. He knows that sights is up, or at least he should, and Jaehong and Flower just punish him, and this allows for quite a big snowball that guarantees a tick. A retake does end up coming in, but losing a frag this early is just unacceptable, really, and it's kind of even a miracle that they end up fragging back and only give up 1 tick. But disengage, resettle up, and guess what? Flower gets the opening pick again, off to the races, and the attrition warfare comes through. Notably, I really like South Korea's patience in these fights. They make sure they don't expend too many resources or get themselves killed in these situations, and that's so important. This is something that I see in matchmaking all the time, where players really don't understand how to close out an engagement, because even though South Korea have a massive advantage right here, they easily can lose it if they get themselves killed, because as soon as the USA pop this Valkyrie in the sky, the fight is stalled out effectively. And whenever that happens, you have to take the engagement much smarter. Just like it was when Zumba was using self-destruct on the cart on the last map, Eichenwalde, this Mercy flying almost invincible in the sky basically means that South Korea knows they're going to have another entire fight. But sustaining through that and being set up to be ready to fight in a good place after the Valkyrie is done is the difference maker between you winning this fight or potentially USA coming back and winning with respawn advantage almost alone. South Korea doesn't over-aggress to burst down targets through the Valkyrie healing. They try to sustain and take what United States gives them. And then before you know it, the Valkyrie's coming down and they still have all the positioning and they're able to win the end of the fight, which is what you want to play for. They play to close the fight out, and although it gives them less of a time bank, it guarantees that they cap the point. And now let's go all the way back on to attack once again for Korea. This is where the United States defense really impresses. Just like they did against Flower on Eichenwalde when he was playing Pharah, they're able to hide from the damage angles from Widowmaker. They're not giving him anything, and the tank play here is really smart, patient, and disciplined. Not over-aggressing in order to definitely kill the Widowmaker, but challenging the angle, stalling out the fight, which is all you have to do on defense. The enemy's on the clock. Make them take time in order to find the engagement, and the longer you sustain on defense, the better. Jockeying for position back and forth. The United States doesn't give Widow an angle, and the only shot that Widow ever has a chance to hit is against Raucus, who's doing some funky head jukes that even the best players in the world are going to struggle to hit, and the window for him to hit that shot is just too low. This exchange goes back and forth for a minute. Korea attempt to then go send their forces onto the point, but still, because the United States are so good at minimizing the angles of attack that Flower has on this Widow, he just ends up doing functionally nothing. The United States are able to fight the main forces of Korea, fend them off, get an ult advantage, and eventually force Flower to swap to Genji. And this next fight here is just insane. Seolbi was on a massive flank mission to get behind the enemy, waits until South Korea come back at the choke, and then strikes the backline with a pulse bomb on Raucus. Adam expends a res to get him back up. Now with 6v6. Jake, who typically has really good defensive positioning on Soldier, is a little too much in the action here and gets caught up in a crossfire and sadly panics out his tac visor to try to kill Flower. Second res from Adam gets used on Jake, back to his 6v6, and with it, USA pops off frags on Zumba and Jaehong, and as well, Flower gets bursted down before he can use his Dragon Blade. Toby reses 2, and at this point, I would say the fight is pretty much even. Everybody's used everything. But two principles came at play for USA to lose this point. One, they used their support ults earlier than South Korea. Kind of a no-no. This ends up having Toby being in his Valk at the end of the fight, which is when you want your support ultimates, which might have been okay, but then United States also commits too hard for the objective here. I think the better play is to wait out Toby on this Valkyrie. Give them the objective for a tick or two if you have to. Wait out that Valk because you can't fight in this situation when they have the support ult advantage. It's up and running, and forcing yourself to attempt to fight and stall the objective here is an overcommitment that I really want to see the West stop doing because it just loses games against Eastern competition. It's as if even in the pro scene, teams are afraid to C9 and not touch the objective at the right time. But as we just saw with South Korea's attack on second, when the enemy have support ults up, disengage and stay alive. Don't force yourself on the objective and give them all that advantage and lose your life. You have to yield objective time when the enemy have a resource advantage, always. And because they didn't and they overstayed their welcome, well, the unwillingness to yield any objective time made it pretty much impossible, I think, for United States to end up on top on that fight. Okay, well, South Korea get that point, but we're moving into point B now. And again, Seolbi is just getting away with murder. The USA don't see these flanks coming, put that res on cooldown immediately. Fact Fiction was getting burned down and accidentally falls into the waiting arms of Seolbi as well, and the defense gets botched. It's really hard there, without controlling the high ground from the start, to have any chance of holding. Backed up into the corner like that, there isn't a lot that you can do. I'm a bit confused of why Fact Fiction was so low jumping up to the high ground, but either way, scores posted. Moving on to the United States attack. Flower on the soldier this time, not on a Junkrat on his own, which is kind of telling. But upon seeing that Korea wasn't running the Orisa comp this time, Jake goes to the soldier rather than the Junkrat, and Sinatraa goes on his own little flanking mission here to scout out the defense and try to get a pull and a response out of South Korea. He keeps the defense there, and it buys time for Jake to set up on top of the staircase. With no barrier tank on the defense means that through attrition and this positioning, the USA should just win this fight. South Korea could have won this engagement if they had more of a tanky composition, their Rhine Zarya, perhaps the Orisa set up from that same angle, but having their Tracer overhead and Jake on the staircase just meant that South Korea was basically funneled into an engagement they couldn't really win. Moving on to point B, USA go into this with a ton of time and battle it out on the high ground, start coming out on top. But again, Jake pulls out attack visor and gets focused down immediately. Sinatraa and Zumba just refuse to allow him to get one off. Reses come back and forth, and this fight is largely mechanical, as both DPS ultimates didn't do a whole heck of a lot. And the USA do a good job of cleaning up the frags, using their basic abilities, holding the positioning, but much like Lunatic High is, South Korea is incredible at stalling out the point, trickling out one by one and sustaining their lives, waiting and biding their time, and spoiler alert, they're gonna lose this push when it looks like there's no excuse to. And I gotta say, this again looks like an overcommitment to the objective, because look at what Jaehong does. Sneaky Zenyatta running up to the high ground like he's playing Splinter Cell. Korea are content with putting minimal bodies on the point to contest it, to stall out the progress on the objective, whereas the United States are trying to raw brute force it a bit too much. It was winning them the frags, but it just isn't really physically possible to frag fast enough to win in these scenarios. You have to set up with the engagement to play horde mode properly. I think Jake's gotta be on the high ground here. Being on the objective made it a lot easier for him to not see this flank come from the Zenyatta, sniping out his soldier sights again. Whereas a bit more patience and map control in this scenario would have let for that sights to get massive value on the high ground. It seems crazy and counterintuitive, but the defense getting just one kill at the right time when reses are down is enough to win an entire fight. Now, the United States eventually come back with another attrition battle, and they eventually win it here again, but they had so much time and they could have gone into this, again, just like Eichenwalde, with a massive advantage in the time bank, and only needed to get a tick on first to win the map. Instead, now, both teams are going to have a chance to fight in overtime with a minute to work with. The United States defense set up in the back corner this time, probably expecting a Widowmaker, but instead South Korea goes for quite a greedy dive comp that doesn't work at all. Speed boosting the Ana into position. She doesn't get protected from Zumba. I don't know what he was looking at during this, but Jaehong gets focused in the center, and that's just a big firing squad. South Korea just get mowed down. Unsure why they didn't go directly to the right, which would have kept them in cover, or even going directly to the left to the high ground to wrap around like USA did. Going right down the middle here was just really odd. Flower panic swaps onto the Widowmaker, does get a kill, but it gets rezzed, and with very little time to work with, South Korea panics onto the point. United States eat it up. Now, minute left to win a tick. Can USA do it? Well, as history tells, they're not going to, unfortunately, but how were they unable to do so? Let's take a look. Now South Korea are blocking the left side. They don't want the soldier to be able to get set up on those stairs again. So the United States smartly takes the ground that South Korea gives them, taking the right side this time instead. But as you can tell, it's harder for Jake to find the angles in order to do meaningful damage, despite his mechanics looking great. Chaos erupts, exchanges back and forth. Flower's hitting a ton of rockets, but it's not getting kills. So it's more or less just feeding Adam's support ult at this point. In the United States, jockey back and forth for positioning and eventually find an opening to get to the point. Adam gets his Valkyrie off, and it's more or less an even fight in this brawl, but somehow Zumba is able to burst down Raucus through Adam's healing, and even though Sinatraa gets the pulse bomb stick on the mini diva of Zumba, the self-destruct kills Raucus again right after he got rezzed. But I want to point out the distance that Jaehong has from this fight. He's miles away from the objective, and and is only starting to creep close when it looks like he might have to contest. I don't want to belabor the point, but you only need one person on the objective at a time. If you're a squishy character, stay away from it. Because Jaehong and Toby are so much further from this fight, the United States have no access point to get to them, because even if they were to try, the tanks could come to enforce them on the perimeter of this point. Whereas all these squishies for the USA being so close to the engagement and the supports for South Korea being outside of it, it allows for a crossfire into them to occur. Now granted, Seolbi hits a incredible pulse bomb onto Sinatraa. You can't really plan for that. Flower comes back on the long respawn with barrage that he farmed up and kind of silences all of that. Quite a sad, dramatic turn of events when it looked like USA had an advantage once again. And I think it really is as simple as having patience in these objective scenarios. If the fight's getting stalled out, don't fight the objective, fight the fight, so to speak. You have to put minimal resources on the objective to just contest it and look for the weaknesses in the team fight rather than playing the objective. Now, unfortunately, the praise for USA ends now because these last two maps that they played were the opposite of the first three that they scrapped out and looked very competitive in. The approach that the United States take on Gibraltar, I think it would be fair to call quite sloppy, unfortunately. On the opening attack, they go for a ride the cart multi-tank strat, one that Jake and LG Evil pulled off quite convincingly in the NA region, but against South Korean teams, I think this gets revealed for how weak it actually is. South Korea, with the soldier of their own, is able to provide the range damage needed in order to really whittle this comp down. And when they realize they have the advantage, they press forward in order to clean up the fight convincingly. This was bound to happen because they have no answer to either shield from that damage because the Winston barrier isn't enough. Normally you would put Rhine here if you were all going to play Deathball in the cart, or they would need their own ranged character or perhaps flanker to go challenge that damage source, because otherwise your tank's face are just going to eat it, and that's what happens. Knowing that didn't work, of course, although I would have liked to see the Roadhog get some use, perhaps from Coolmat, Jake drops it, and the USA mirror the comp of Korea. This high ground control from Flower on the soldier proves to really be a nuisance for the United States. They try to send their tanks up there to deal with him, but the problem is with a Mercy pocket and soldier self-heal, tanks just don't do enough damage. It's not really an answer. You have to get a DPS solution to break that, because otherwise the damage down onto your team is going to be too significant. Having the high ground advantage with soldier here is an instant win button. It's been that way on Gibraltar for a long time, even when soldier was less popular than he is now. And with that being the case, I would have much rather preferred to see a bigger commitment from the team to flush out the high ground. Playing from the low ground here is something that they abandoned, thankfully. And in the next fight, Jake takes the upper left high ground in order to duel from range, and I think that's really important to do. Partially why pick-off characters like Widow are really good on this map as well, because the soldier is going to be peeking out his head at some point, and finding the ranged angle is really important. The other option, of course, is sending your DPS after the high ground, which is why Genji is so popular on attack here as well. But the problem Sinatraa found is that Seolbi was not giving him an inch. In this setup, the soldier in the defense is the president, or the carrier, whatever you want to call him. So with that being the case, you have to prop up him to hold that high ground for as long as possible, so the support either comes directly to him, or instead of Seolbi going off to kill the enemy's backline, his sole job is to just fend off the DPS threat from coming to kill the soldier, because as long as he stays alive, they're going to hold this for quite a long time. Now, the United States eventually find themselves in one of these attrition battles that the Mercy meta is so famous for, largely won by Flower taking an over-aggressive angle this time, and Coolmat scooping him down to be behind the team, and South Korea get caught trying to be a little bit too cute with their defense, and it doesn't work against the Valkyrie, which of course, to some degree, if you have Valkyrie, then you can put a lot of bodies on the cart, because it's nearly impossible to kill Adam in his ult, and as well, it's really inefficient to stall at the cart in that scenario. So what Korea had to do there is their patented stall the objective, don't die type play, but they failed to do that. They commit a little bit more, and Coolmat forces Flower's hand to commit, and that ends up up getting the frags for the United States. Now, with a minute and a half left, the attrition strategy on the cart stalls out for a while, but they don't really get any progress in this fight, even though they start to win it. And another peculiar ultimate from Jake, and in a sec, a pretty low impact transcendence from Raucous. I mean, these are team fight winning abilities that are just kind of getting thrown into nothing. But even with that, the United States have a bit of an advantage, and on this next regroup from South Korea, US could potentially win this fight, get the checkpoint, and possibly even finish the map. But the emergency bastion comes out to de-mech Coolmat, and the positioning choices on this objective is just kind of odd. Raucous emergency swaps to the McCree, which I think could have been a pretty good idea. In this hectic cleanup situation, the flashbang and the ranged projectile can be great, but playing so close just gets him bursted down and his pick more or less wasted. I suppose he was trying to find South Korea coming through different angles and hoping that he could catch out one of their players in order to burst them down, but because they decided to all funnel through, well, he just got overwhelmed and wrecked, and that gamble didn't pay off. Now, where would I have preferred to see him? Well, closer to around Jake and Adam, really, because those are the targets that South Korea is going to look to dive in this re-engagement, and the flashbang to protect them can be all the difference. And also as well, this NA-esque overcommitment to putting too many characters on the cart once again. Here, all Zumba has to do is sacrifice his mech to stall the cart. They're utilizing one character to stop the objective entirely, and the United States are trying to burn down the mech as fast as they can, but that's not the win condition. Killing the mech doesn't matter. The fight is going to continue just by the mere fact that they have a stall character on the cart. You have to concede that, and you can't lose your eye on the actual ball here, which is the major engagement happening. Because Coolmat and Raucous were going to stuff the doorway, well, they just get killed for free. So all the positioning that USA has on the cart is useless and only gets them a stalled cart and man disadvantage, because they send players to go fight a fight they can't win, while they try to push the cart they can't push. This gets the res back onto Toby. It allows for Seolbi to just have his way with Adam, who has no protection whatsoever, with Coolmat demeched and Raucous as a secondary support, which, if he had that flashbang up, probably could have stopped that altogether. And because the United States don't set up to win this engagement and instead force their way onto the cart, well, South Korea just wins the fight entirely. Now, imagine a different world where there was some high ground, better defensive positioning for this retake to come in. Play could have happened here for the United States to do something with this opportunity, but instead, South Korea win this fight easily just by basic retake principles alone. And let's face it, not getting second on Gibraltar is kind of a death sentence. Yeah, you can hold the hanger sometimes for quite a while, but you're not doing it against South Korea. Such a poor attack phase isn't really acceptable if you want to try to win the map, so they're kind of doomed from the start here, but let's look what South Korea cook up in order to deal with this. Well, Flower, of course, on the Widowmaker, and this is one way you can test that almost unbeatable high ground control that the defense can get on Gibraltar first. A little bit of patience on pushing the cart. Notice that Korea isn't putting all their team on the cart at one time. They're pushing the cart when they have it for free, but they're making sure to send characters to go handle the high ground, figure out where the enemy's setting up, taking their own high ground. Flowers poking down Jake on the Roadhog, which was an odd choice in order to combat this. In a more or less even fight on the ground, Seolbi frags back Fact Fiction, Toby reses up Mano, but the key frag on the Mercy here meant that Korea had the res advantage, which gives them the team fight. I don't dislike this triple tank coming from the United States, I just don't think they played it in the way it needed to be played. Jake is much more effective at brawling on the cart rather than contesting the high ground to just absorb shots from Widow. He would have been a difference maker, melting down the tanks even faster on the low ground. We've broken down in the past how a team like Envious more or less runs a similar type of setup, a greedy single support pick, putting your other support, Raucous in this case, on a Soldier or perhaps sometimes a Sombra, but it requires you to play in the right spots and take the engagement properly, which just didn't happen. It isn't just Flower popping off with shots here, it's the setup not being able to handle a pretty basic attack coming out from South Korea. Moving on into the hangar phase, South Korea is going to have a few fights potentially to take second, but notice Flower taking this high ground stuff that I keep being so wild about. He's able to put some damage on the ground, and the forces that they do have on the cart are able to use their resources that they build up from the major fight that they won earlier. United States never establish high ground control, never look like they have a chance on defense, and just get rolled on Gibraltar. Ooh, feels bad, man. Well, at least there's one last map to play for some reason, even though the scoreline at this point is 3-2. The tie, of course, giving a win to both teams, but South Korea have to win 3 maps in total in order to win the series, so let's move on to Oasis, a map where Farah is meta. Why? Because, well, Farah likes open space. The less roofs that are around, relevant ones anyway, mean that there's far more chances for Farah to be able to hit a rocket. And the United States fall subject to this. And here's another key takeaway. South Korea go for the objectively weaker, quote-unquote, Lucio pick, but the speed boost is everything. South Korea get to the point first, get the angle of attack out in the open, and the lack of speed means that this attrition-style comp just isn't cutting it. They don't have enough damage mitigation with the Diva Winston, and Jake, Raucus, and Adam have nowhere to go. And normally this comp could work if you had your own Farah in the sky in order to challenge the enemy Farah, which I am sure the USA saw coming, but this strategy fail makes them lose this fight convincingly, and look at Flower's ult percentage, oh god. USA back at it again, and they take the fight outside again against the Flower Farah, which just demolished you the first time. I don't know what to say. I mean, they look a little bit better because they were able to frag back. I think their strategy was to go for the ground, but you have to do that in the ways that they did on other maps far better. When they did it on Eichenwalde, when they did it on Hanamura, they fought indoors to win the ground. Whereas if you fight outside against the Farah, well, she can pick whatever target she wants. She's got the pick of the litter, and that fight is just over before it started, even though the United States gets some frags back. It just doesn't matter. If they run this comp, I think you have to have a Lucio, because you got to get out of those lines of sight for the Farah and quickly get into the positioning you want, either chasing after the jump pad or getting in close range and fighting where you need to fight. The comp just wasn't an acceptable decision in order to battle what South Korea was doing. They got wrecked for it, and Jake goes back to the drawing board and picks up his own Farah. Now, Jake's gonna go to contest Flower in the air, which is a decent call. Only problem is, even though Jake nearly finds this frag, if you look carefully, Flower is able to turn his attention down to the ground and likely did some significant damage to Sinatraa, allowing for Mano to clean that up. Flower gets a kill on Raucus, which with no speed boost is some of the easiest rockets you can hit on the ground, and that small little segment of a couple rockets that Flower's able to sneak onto the ground while Jake is failing to kill him in the air is all the difference in this fight being won. I love the strategy of attacking the Farah mid-air with your own Farah. I think it's one of the best ways to deal with her right now. The only problem is there's a little metagame in that with the more rockets you can sneak in on the ground than the enemy Farah who's trying to duel you. If the other Farah fails in killing you, well, you just win the fight. And although this is bad for the USA, it's pretty good for us because viewing this, we get to see every type of permutation of how to lose a fight on Oasis, I think. Moving up to 99 now, Jake finally finds the mark early in the fight, allowing for USA to swipe the point from South Korea. But importantly, Adam had to use his Valkyrie in order to do so. And this is quite a intelligent play from South Korea because whenever you're in a one-fight victory situation, allowing the enemy to use some resources in order to set up for you to be able to use your resources on a retake can just win the round altogether. It doesn't matter if you win 100-0, you get the same map win if it's 100-99. Next push, USA frags out, but they do pull out the Transcendence from Raucus. I think it's a bit odd that Jae Hong used his Valkyrie on a bit of a eco push, but nevertheless, ultimates slightly favoring South Korea, but Flower gets the key pickoff on Adam from miles away, and USA are starting to lose control. They know that they can't fully commit to the objective here, so they have to yield some space. They have to play really close to the edge to have a chance of being able to come back in this fight. Fact Fiction more or less sacrifices himself on the retake in order to stall the objective, but he fails to do so, and the flip comes in. He does get rezzed, but the brawl is back on. Flower wins the air battle again. Both reses out for the United States. And between the aggressive tank play out of Mano and the rockets from Flower, they push United States off the point, win the frags, and United States don't touch the objective in time. I know, C9, right? Well, the only problem is they didn't win the fight either. So that's the bigger problem here, not the objective. They were getting fragged and died and didn't set up to win the fight, meaning that even if another player was able to stall for a few more seconds in overtime, they were fighting a 4v6 with 0 reses and Jaehong was about to have Valkup. Like, it's really important to read this play as finding the cases where the United States had to win the frag battle, not simply just saying, well, they C9'd. No, that's not what lost them the round, you know? Okay, second stage of Oasis also marks quite a bit of a difference in the play style of the Korean tanks versus how the United States engage in the same situation. It could be a little bit difficult to see, but the way I would describe the South Korean tank play is defensive. This is so important. I hear so many Western tank players speak like they're supposed to be taking damage, but in so many scenarios is that just not the case whatsoever. A lot of the times, especially when you have ranged DPS, this is really important, you have to give the ranged DPS time to win their duel. You can't over-aggress and take more damage and be heal greedy and try to force value for yourself. You have to counter-engage, out-position, and don't die yourself. What the United States tanks here do is get in the muck of things. Meanwhile, Seolbi and Flower are on the mobility classes that are really hard to hit, and because South Korea's tanks play to avoid damage, their team in general requires less healing. The tank players, you have to remember what predicament you're putting your healers in these scenarios. If you force yourself to take damage and you have to heal, but the enemy's tanks play defensively and don't take damage, that means the healers for the other team can do more effective things, like Toby can speed boost, Jaehong can damage amp, and the team that's allowed to be more flexible with their support play wins the fight slowly. Mano engages only when Flower hits a rocket. Zumba is basically hiding behind a pillar, not taking any damage, looking to catch damage. And with the swarming DPSs of Flower and Seolbi roaming around the point, the damage just overwhelms the battle, and they win the team fight with better resource use all around. Better tanking is the key, but it's about the exchange of damage with that tanking. There's a major difference with assuming that your tanks are supposed to engage and supposed to take damage, whereas the more patient play wins out here. South Korea as a region is so good at patient defensive play, and it's important that we all start to take notes on how and why this works so we can do it ourselves, especially Western pros and USA. I don't want to see this happen again next year. Some really late deaths coming out of the United States here as well, and the second engagement comes at about 50%, which isn't looking good. And honestly, I think this is just tilt. I assume that the morale of the team just wasn't there, because look at the tanks cross paths for the United States. The focus fire targets don't seem to be in order. Jake is getting wrecked by Flower at this point mid-air. Adam reses him to die again. Here USA is losing on the duel front, on the focus fire front, on the damage mitigation front, and going into this last sort of trickle fight, they're in panic mode. Mano is manhandling Jake outside above the point, proving that he can look every bit as good as Miro can on the Winston, and you just hate to see a series end like this so flat. The last two maps were really a downward trend for the United States, and I personally think the tension probably just got too high, the morale probably dropped in the team, perhaps the shot calling was a bit contentious, I'm not exactly sure, but the way they handled their engagements and how they took the maps on both Gibraltar and Oasis was about as bad as it can look, I think, and luckily, losing helps you learn, right? So with any luck, after looking back on how some of these clutch engagements got turned around for Korea, and especially how these last few maps were just train wrecks, I think the United States have the tools definitely to compete with any region if they put in the work to learn the game. They really surprised me in their ability to handle and compete on the first three maps. It's just those small mastery elements of exchanging complex ult fights that really would have been the difference in getting some earlier map wins. That doesn't go to say that if they did execute even better earlier, that South Korea would have left off the gas, because teams don't really deflate in South Korea. It's pretty rare that you see a drop off in performance. Most teams are well practiced and used to the grueling nature of a long series, especially since these players played at Apex, whereas the USA team had crucial players that haven't played on LAN before. Korea also had the benefit of having more of a core team, whereas USA has picked players from across different teams, so they're going to naturally lack a bit of synergy. But regardless of all those concessions, I think with a bit of studying and a bit of dedication towards the strategical macro elements of the game, not just the mechanical, skillful play, USA and other regions could contest South Korea for next year's World Cup. This series was great, and to be honest, the other series with South Korea were more competitive than I think people gave them credit for. This USA series was the most explosive for sure, but Rogue played them really close. AKM won the Pharah duel very convincingly, even though they lost Oasis themselves. And Canada proved that different cheese strategies could throw South Korea for a loop. They just lacked a little bit of execution themselves as well. So I hope this video was useful and entertaining to help develop our understanding of Overwatch esports. Now that we have this better spectator client, we have so many different eyes on the esport in general, I really hope that the Western scene can clean up some of these misconceptions of how they approach playing maps, because the Korean style of maintaining team fights, when to ignore the objective, when to force it, ult economy, all these macro elements of the game are superior in South Korea as a general region. And you're gonna have to play these guys in the Overwatch League, you Westerners, so if you wanna have any success there, in my opinion, the rest of the world is really going to have to adapt and answer for this style of play, because it has proven to be the most effective. If you enjoyed the video and you found it useful, please leave a like. It really does help us out and lets us know that you're enjoying the content. If you haven't already, please subscribe, because we upload each and every day, so you're gonna wanna hit the bell icon so you get notified when our videos go live. Linked in the description is our Twitter, where we tweet out news, updates, and dank memes. That's been it for me. I've been FREEDO for Your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.